They were certain you'd collapse the moment they turned on you. That's the brutal truth nobody dares to whisper aloud. Your rivals trusted that the falsehoods they spread would become the shovel that dug your grave. They figured if they gossiped long enough, spoke loud enough, and dirtied your name with enough venom, the world would swallow their manufactured version of your identity. Yet now observe them retreating into muteness, strutting with their eyes glued to the pavement, because the very schemes they directed at your reputation have circled back like a relentless boomerang. And this round, the wound cuts far deeper than they could have predicted. That's simply how cosmic justice operates. It never requests entry. It never sends advance notice. It merely materializes, collects the outstanding balance and departs, leaving the opposition stumbling in utter bewilderment. They were certain you'd collapse the moment they turned on you. That's the brutal truth nobody dares to whisper aloud. Your rivals trusted that the falsehoods they spread would become the shovel that dug your grave. They figured if they gossiped long enough, spoke loud enough, and dirtied your name with enough venom, the world would swallow their manufactured version of your identity. Yet now observe them retreating into muteness, strutting with their eyes glued to the pavement, because the very schemes they directed at your reputation have circled back like a relentless boomerang. And this round, the wound cuts far deeper than they could have predicted. That's simply how cosmic justice operates. It never requests entry. It never sends advance notice. It merely materializes, collects the outstanding balance, and departs, leaving the opposition stumbling in utter bewilderment. Chapter 2. Every choice carries wisdom. The atmosphere encircling you has transformed. Can you sense it? It's the hush that follows the hurricane, the variety of quiet where everybody recognizes something seismic occurred, yet nobody volunteers to articulate it. The foes who cackled the loudest have now become the very ones glancing over their shoulders, praying no one witnesses how catastrophically they're unraveling. And you, marked one, you're standing amid that wreckage, possessing a tenacity they never imagined you'd wield. Their arsenal lies abandoned on the soil, their vocal cords have fractured, and abruptly the identical individuals who swore they'd entomb you cannot even bring themselves to look at you. That phenomenon extends far beyond mere happenstance. That's the cosmos constructing a cautionary exhibit out of them. And just before we plunge any deeper, allow me a momentary pause. If you've ever experienced this reality in your own existence, if you recognize this transmission belongs to you, tap that like button immediately and subscribe. That modest gesture transcends mere encouragement. It's vibrational energy, it's resonance. It's channeling this message right back into the universal current. Gratitude for standing alongside this purpose. Now, let's circle back to what's transpiring, because this dwarfs any notion of vengeance, dwarfs any rumor. This is resolution delivered with surgical exactitude. Observe, adversaries acknowledge no boundaries when they're absorbed in their machinations. They assume humiliation will cling to you eternally. They assume confiscating opportunities, sabotaging your advancement, or ridiculing your restraint translates to triumph. Yet history systematically disproves them. Contemplate this. How many influential figures, whether within your personal sphere or across the globe, initiated their descent the instant they presumed themselves inviolable? The loftier they ascended on falsehoods, the more devastating their impact when authenticity came pounding. And here's the unflinching reality. Cosmic balance doesn't materialize when it's convenient for you. It materializes when the opposition grows comfortable, when they trust they've achieved safety, when they've convinced themselves you've vanished permanently. That's precisely when the foundation ruptures beneath their feet. Perhaps you've already witnessed it. Individuals who attempted to disgrace you abruptly hemorrhaging their own standing. Individuals who derided your hardship, now discovering themselves pleading for compassion. Outsiders interpret it as misfortune, but you and I recognize this carries no element of chance. That's the cosmos realigning everything and guaranteeing no lesson remains unsettled. Chapter 3. Why insight outweighs vengeance. Let me illustrate with an example. Recall how historically there perpetually existed those who celebrated prematurely. Reflect upon the companion who deceived you, only to find themselves abandoned when their fabrications returned to strangle them, or the superior who endeavored to demolish your self-assurance only to wind up unveiled before the very audience they once sought to dazzle. That sequence has been cycling since time immemorial. They imagine they've extracted something from you, yet in truth, they've merely swapped their own tranquility for fleeting gratification. And once the equilibrium restores, their hubris transforms into their reckoning. This explains why I characterize this form of cosmic justice as terrifying, because it accomplishes more than humbling. It disgraces. It seizes more than a trifle. It strips bare everything they considered inviolable. Standing, alliances, finances, clout. When they endeavored to annihilate your identity, they were effectively drafting a covenant with the cosmos. And the settlement constitutes everything they believed immune to loss. That's why onlookers observe them presently and murmur, "They must have tangled with the wrong individual." Because they did. They contacted what should have remained untouched. And chosen one, this marks your ascension. You needn't articulate a syllable because the stillness surrounding you resonates more powerfully than any address. You've navigated the inferno and emerged honed, composed, immovable. They're the ones wrestling with insomnia. They're the ones replaying every underhanded maneuver they executed, bewildered by how swiftly the entire structure imploded. And in their core, they comprehend this carries no trace of randomness. It's cosmic justice inscribed in capital letters across their existence. So prepare yourself because the narrative you're about to absorb bears no accidental quality. It transcends mere irony. It qualifies as revelation. This demonstrates the cosmos reaffirming that no action directed against you escapes documentation. This isn't deferred cosmic justice. This is cosmic justice broadcasting live and unfiltered. The variety that petrifies adversaries because it validates their powerlessness. And take my word, they absorb their instructions, so presently, let's descend deeper, stride by stride, because what you're about to receive transcends mere anecdote. It constitutes evidence that the cosmos plays no favorites, it plays equitably. And if you've ever pondered whether your adversaries genuinely experienced the consequences of their conduct toward you, this is where everything crystallizes. Chapter 4. Entrusting the Divine with Perfect Equity Deposit, a remark below featuring the expression lesson absorbed. If you're prepared to witness how their unraveling progressed fragment by fragment, that's beyond a casual emoji gesture. It represents you staking your position within this collective truth. And heed this, if you've accompanied me this extensively, I've already ascertained you possess a different constitution. The typical individual would have departed by now. But you, marked one, you sense the gravitational pull because deep within you recognize this communication serves as your validation. This cosmic justice carried personal weight, and the specifics will resonate with startling familiarity. It'll feel nearly as though I'm vocalizing your private journal. That's the precision the cosmos demonstrates. So, brace yourself because from this juncture forward, it intensifies in shock value, in undeniable nature, and in gratification. And take my word, once you absorb it entirely, you'll never perceive cosmic justice through the same lens again. Let's commence. Number 1. They ridiculed your battle scars. Presently, they're suffocating within their own injuries. Curious how the most thunderous mockers consistently become the initial casualties of their own remedy. They didn't merely jeer at you. They converted your intimate anguish into their communal entertainment. Every droplet you released became material for their comedy routine. They murmured behind your spine, rolled their eyes at your composure, and behaved as though your hardship constituted a brand of fragility emblazoned across your visage. To them, your fractures held no sanctity. They represented entertainment. Yet here's the harsh reality. While they occupied themselves deriding what nearly demolished you, they were authoring their own chronicle of collapse. And cosmic justice was silently constructing the platform for their exhibition. Let's establish clarity. What you bore carried no featherweight. The sleepless evenings, the constricting sensation as though your ribcage might implode. The junctures when vanishing felt preferable, yet you maintained momentum, maintained respiration. They couldn't have withstood a fraction of it. A solitary week inhabiting your circumstances, and they would have implored for clemency. Yet rather than empathy, they selected cruelty. Rather than encouragement, they dispensed sarcasm. And rather than listening, they transformed your restraint into ammunition directed at you. Yet silence doesn't equate to frailty. Silence represents the terrain where fortitude establishes its roots. You were mourning, you were reconstructing, you were acquiring the capacity to perpetuate existence after existence itself attempted to extinguish you. Chapter 5. Maintaining focus on your mission. Now examine the inversion. The very tempest they derided has relocated into their dwelling, and it shows no indication of departing. What once provoked their laughter now generates their trembling. The heartbreak they reduced to comedy has now split their chest asunder. The solitude they branded as pitiable now suffocates their lungs. The psychological burden they attributed entirely to your imagination represents the initial weight pulverizing them upon awakening. And here's the most poetic element. This time their torment lacks privacy. It occupies public space. Observers can perceive it. Observers can sense it. The identical assembly that once participated in jeering at you now murmurs behind their backs. Remarkable. They're harvesting precisely what they distributed. Doesn't that send shivers? Cosmic justice doesn't tap gently. It obliterates the door from its hinges. It doesn't subtly recalibrate the equilibrium. It tilts them with such violence that the very individuals who considered themselves invulnerable discover themselves groveling in the dirt. And marked one perceives the vindication. You needn't retaliate. You needn't unveil them. The cosmos accomplished that on your behalf more thunderously than you could ever orchestrate. Their facade disintegrated, their fissures became visible, and no quantity of manufactured grins can disguise it. You might question the timing. Why did cosmic balance require such an extended interval to circulate? Because timing governs everything. Had the cosmos disciplined them prematurely, they would have dismissed it as misfortune. Yet presently it stands irrefutable. The descent is so surgical, so lyrical, that even they acknowledge what's unfolding. They recognize this bears no element of randomness. They recognize this constitutes the toll for deriding anguish they never comprehended. Let me narrate an episode. Years prior, there existed an individual who ridiculed a colleague for experiencing panic episodes, branded them fragile, labeled them theatrical, crafted humor at their expense. Months afterward, that identical tormentor forfeited their employment, their partnership, and spiraled into the very anxiety they once scorned. And you understand what transpired. No one surrounding them extended compassion because individuals retained memories of their frigidity. That's the perpetual cycle. That's what unfailingly transpires. The merriment evaporates, the tables invert, and abruptly the entertainer becomes the jest. And harbor no confusion. This transcends vengeance. This constitutes unveiling. The cosmos doesn't redirect suffering to gratify you. It redirects suffering to instruct them, to remind them that malevolence carries no immunity, to remind them that mocking another's tempest guarantees you'll eventually submerge within your own deluge. They presumed your battle scars diminished you. They presumed your muteness signified capitulation. Yet your battle scars constitute testimony you persisted, and their muteness presently constitutes testimony they cannot withstand what they once discovered humorous. So pose this question to yourself. What genuinely qualifies as weakness? Is it the one who withstood heartbreak and maintained forward motion, or the one who derided it and presently cannot vacate their bed? Is it the one who navigated isolation and reconstructed themselves from foundation zero, or the one who once branded you contemptible, now soliciting acknowledgement merely to sense vitality? The response stands evident. The marked one never embodied weakness. The marked one was sculpted within furnace flames. And here's what amplifies this cosmic reckoning. When you endured, you conducted yourself discreetly. Most individuals never grasp the magnitude of your suffering, yet when they endure, it broadcasts. It manifests visibly. It mortifies. Their vibrational frequency has destabilized. Their expressions appear coerced. Their laughter has expired. Everyone perceives the burden they're transporting. And nobody rallies behind them this instance. Because here's the underlying truth. Individuals don't champion cruelty when it detonates. Individuals retreat, observe, and whisper. That's what materializes when you engage with combustion. Marked 1. Don't categorize this as coincidence. This constitutes evidence that nothing you navigated existed without purpose. Every tear you shed transformed into a seed deposited within the cosmic terrain, and presently the harvest has arrived. They imagined they were ridiculing you, yet they were actually ridiculing themselves within the reflection of what awaited, and that reflection has fractured. Their arrogance has transmuted into ash, and their laughter has been suffocated by the very obscurity they once celebrated. So permit them to marinate within it. Permit them to sample the remedy they once forced down your esophagus, because while they're submerging within their own lesions, you're ascending loftier, lighter, unencumbered. You no longer transport the disgrace of their derision. You transport the certificate of your endurance, and that, Marked 1, represents the most terrifying spectacle for them to witness. Because presently they comprehend that the very anguish they once ridiculed metamorphosed into the cornerstone of your resilience. And their descent, it transcends mere irony. It embodies cosmic justice in its most pristine, unadulterated, severe manifestation. Number 2, they discharged a malediction, and it ricocheted back, resembling a charged weapon they never realized they were clutching. The snares they constructed for you transformed into the excavations where they're now entombed. They carried such certainty about themselves, they launched their maledictions like projectiles, anticipating they would penetrate you, would blemish your standing beyond restoration. And when nothing grazed you, when you stood more towering than previously, they spiraled into panic, because subsequently everything commenced disintegrating for them, one element after another, resembling dominoes toppling in rapid succession. The currency they paraded dissolved overnight. The connections they exhibited shattered like glass fragmenting against stone. Their tranquility evaporated, and abruptly they were inhabiting perpetual turbulence, as though each sunrise delivered a fresh catastrophe. Isn't it peculiar how swiftly villains begin subscribing to cosmic justice once they're the ones hemorrhaging? Initially they attributed it to happenstance, perhaps an extended stretch of misfortune. Yet when every entrance slammed against their features, when their grins hollowed, when their nights transformed into haunts saturated with paranoia, they vocalized the singular explanation their guilt-ridden psyches could fabricate. It must originate from you. You must have redirected something. Envision that. So assured in their malevolence, yet so terrorized when it rebounds. They whispered in alcoves. They theorized. They attributed their torment to you. Because within their cognition, you couldn't conceivably remain that impervious without retaliating mystically. Yet here's the irony that incinerates them. You didn't elevate a digit. You didn't ignite a taper, recite an incantation, or breathe their identities in vengeance. You possessed no necessity. Whatever you propel toward others will ultimately arrive at your own threshold. It transcends supernatural forces. It represents mathematical certainty. That's the operational mechanism of the cosmos. Their malediction wasn't intercepted by you. It was repudiated by the regulations they assumed exempted them. They loaded the firearm, aimed it at you, and compressed the trigger only to discover the projectile circling backward into their own thoracic cavity. Now, permit me to inquire, why do you believe they've descended into such paranoia? Why do you believe they abruptly commenced exploring digital platforms for protective enchantments, igniting sage, transporting crystals, or murmuring invocations they previously dismissed? Because they perceive it. They recognize fundamentally that something fractured free the instant they advance toward you. Envision this. A burglar infiltrates a residence only to discover the portal secures behind them, ensnaring them within as alerts reverberate. That's precisely what materialized. They believed they operated with impunity to sabotage you, yet their own designs imprisoned them within a confinement of ramifications. Energy resembles a returning projectile. Its trajectory remains invisible until it reverses and splits your cranium open. They never anticipated it. They presumed cosmic justice operated gradually, resembling some postponed chastisement that perhaps they could circumvent. They theorized that if they fabricated convincingly enough, if they persuaded sufficient masses, If they concealed their motives behind counterfeit expressions, they'd emerge unscathed. Yet, energy doesn't respond to the narrative you disseminate to others. It responds to the authenticity you harbor within, and their authenticity constituted venom. It embodied envy, it embodied conceit, it embodied desperation to witness your demolition. That venom couldn't locate you. Consequently, it decomposed them instead. Envision this. An individual pours corrosive liquid into a vessel designated for you, yet neglects and ingests it personally. That's the velocity of the reversal. They engineered maledictions bearing such virulence that the cosmos possessed no alternative except to declare, "Return to originator." And when it struck them, it exhibited no gentleness. It didn't knock courteously. It carved through their existence like wildfire, incinerating everything they considered fortified. Their currency depleted, their alliances collapsed, their equilibrium disintegrated and chosen one. Doesn't that constitute the most terrifying dimension for them? They genuinely believed you authored their undoing. They theorized you must have been orchestrating behind the curtain. Why? Because they underestimated your blamelessness. They failed to recognize that when blamelessness faces assault, cosmic justice doesn't seep, it erupts. It doesn't merely recalibrate equilibrium, it overturns the entire surface. And presently, they're seated amid wreckage, attempting to reassemble a puzzle they themselves demolished. The malediction never belonged to you to cast. It belonged to them to transport. And here's where the encouragement materializes for you, chosen one. You never required vengeance to secure victory. You never required contaminating your grip. You simply maintained locomotion, maintained respiration, maintained selecting tranquility over pettiness. And that's what petrifies them supremely, because they cannot attribute any malediction to you. They cannot substantiate that you retaliated. Your sole transgression was existing, and existing authentically proved sufficient to illuminate their obscurity. Doesn't that constitute authority? Doesn't that embody the most exquisite triumph? Now you might be wondering, why did it circulate with such velocity this interval? Because their intentions concentrated with excessive intensity, excessive precision, excessive malevolence. It condensed into a tempest that couldn't levitate. It required grounding. And since it couldn't ground upon you, it grounded upon them. That's the dimension they never anticipated. They believed they embodied invincibility. They believed their appendages could remain pristine, while their cores remained contaminated. Yet presently they comprehend that every malediction carries a return address, and theirs was inscribed in pigment they cannot efface. Envision this. An individual hurls insults into a gorge, and the reverberation returns with greater volume than their original utterance, rattling their skeletal structure. That's what's materializing for them. Their reverberation carries greater amplitude than their original action, and it pursues them throughout diurnal and nocturnal hours. They navigate resembling specters of their former selves, second-guessing each footfall, suspicious of every individual, paranoid regarding the very vibrational energy they unleashed. And you maintain your stance amid the aftermath, untouched. You possess no obligation to defend yourself. The verification resides within their unraveling. The narrative articulates itself. They designated you as the malediction's recipient, yet it metamorphosed into their personal crucifix. And the globe observes. The identical individuals who previously laughed alongside them now murmur, "Something's malfunctioning." Since they advanced against the marked one, nothing has maintained its previous state. They dreaded your muteness more intensely than any enchantment, because muteness constituted the shield they couldn't penetrate. So permit them to spiral. Permit them to ignite sage. Permit them to vocalize hollow invocations. Permit them to accuse you of the tempest they birthed. Because when the solar cycle concludes, they recognize the underlying truth. They recognize they maledicted themselves. They recognize they stabbed at silhouettes and concluded hemorrhaging from their personal blade. And that awareness, that crushing, mortifying consciousness, constitutes the genuine malediction. They're not merely navigating consequences. They're navigating a reflective surface that displays them precisely as they exist. Architects of their personal annihilation and chosen one. That embodies your conquest. You never engaged. You never elevated a digit. The cosmos battled on your behalf, and it battled in a fashion that eliminated all ambiguity. They didn't merely experience defeat. They experienced forfeiture of dominion. They didn't merely endure. They endured publicly, visibly, undeniably. And while they stumble across the debris of their personal malediction, you ascend untouched, radiant with certification that blamelessness doesn't constitute frailty, it constitutes sanctuary. That's the classification of cosmic justice they never foresaw, and presently tardiness has captured them. Number 3, they attempted to manipulate the controls. Presently, they're suspended by them. The fabrications they manufactured transformed into the ligatures constricting their personal trachea. They considered themselves inviolable. The orchestrator concealed behind the curtain. The brilliant tactician manipulating chords while you gyrated in bewilderment. That's how they perceived it, projecting warmth into your countenance while authoring betrayals behind your spine. They maintained certainty that every angle remained secured, every accomplice strategically positioned, every narrative sculpted to flawlessness. To them, you represented nothing exceeding a token on their board, a persona within their narrative. Yet here's the verity they never calculated. When you occupy the role of puppet master for sufficient duration, the chords commence encircling your personal appendages until you're the one immobilized. Envision this: an arachnid spinning a lattice of such magnitude it perceives itself unassailable, only to become ensnared within the adhesive filaments itself, struggling within the very trap it engineered. That's them presently. Their lattice of fabrications is disintegrating. The individuals they exploited now murmur behind their spine, cross-referencing accounts, establishing connections. Abruptly, the grandiose illusion projects no brilliance. It projects desperation, and the so-called brilliant mind stands exposed as nothing exceeding a manipulator, scrambling to preserve the facade. Manipulation constitutes authority acquired on installment. Sooner or eventually, the invoice arrives. And presently the invoice has materialized. The Confederates they presumed unwavering are now retreating, recognizing they occupied mere pawn positions. The chronicles they perverted now unravel with velocity, exceeding their capacity to conceal them. Every interrogation registers as spotlight exposure. Every dialogue registers as tribunal. That paranoia they previously implanted within your existence has become their tangible reality. They cannot slumber without contemplating who's scheming against them. You might be wondering, why is this materializing presently? Because fabrications carry expiration dates. They don't mature gracefully. The longer they rest, the more they putrefy. And once individuals detect the fragrance of duplicity, they commence tugging at the filaments. That's precisely what's materializing. Their lattice doesn't constitute a citadel. It constitutes a confinement. The identical stage they constructed for your undoing has metamorphosed into the theater of their mortification. And chosen one, here's the aesthetic dimension. You never required unveiling them. The cosmos accomplished that. Their insecurity has manifested obviously. Their compulsion for authority has materialized as their undoing. They're confined within the narrative they authored, entangled within the lattice they spun. And this instance presents no extraction portal. The puppet master has metamorphosed into the puppet jerking upon the chords of dread, paranoia, and self-annihilation. Number 4, they yearned for your devastation and concluded inhabiting within their personal malediction. Every malediction they breathed across you represented nothing exceeding a correspondence addressed retroactively to themselves. They didn't merely disfavor you, they became consumed by the contemplation of witnessing your descent. Every dialogue transformed into an altar of bitterness. Every nocturnal hour, every vacant reflection, every syllable dripping from their tongues saturated with obsession. They converted envy into ceremonial practice, supplicating for your unraveling. The fashion certain individuals supplicate for precipitation following aridity, they deemed it warranted. They convinced themselves your luminosity proved excessive, your tranquility excessively undeserved, your bounties excessively inequitable. They coveted your triumph, yet since they couldn't expropriate it, they implored for its combustion. Animosity masquerading as supplication remains animosity, and the cosmos fails to confuse the duel. And here's the terrifying verity. They genuinely maintained faith that their utterances carried consequence against you. Yet the cosmos doesn't respond to identities, it responds to motivations. You cannot envelop a putrefied core within sacred linguistics and anticipate it blossoming. So while they implored for your failure, they weren't aligning with your descent. They were aligning with their personal annihilation. Every bitter syllable constituted a seed, yet they deposited it within their personal garden. And presently the harvest emerges putrefied, strangling their existence with botanical chaos, forfeiture, postponement, and sequestration. Envision this: an individual excavating a sepulchre for you, only to tumble into it personally because the terrain beneath their personal foundation collapsed initially. That's precisely what's materializing. The very supplications they imagined would strip you constitute the ones stripping them. They murmured, "I hope they forfeit everything." And the cosmos responded, "Documented. You just claimed that destiny." The reflective surface doesn't fabricate. It merely reveals what they projected. And presently they're spiraling into alarm. They're attributing circumstances to misfortune. They're accusing acquaintances of envy. They're even characterizing it as metaphysical conflict. Yet fundamentally, they recognize those so-called supplications never qualified as supplications whatsoever. They constituted maledictions. Their personal tongue established the trap, and their personal energy compressed the trigger. So, chosen one, absorb this. You never engaged. You never required retaliating. You preserved purity, and purity constitutes its personal armor. They're not navigating punishment. They're navigating reflection, and the reflection proves merciless. Everything they yearned for you constitutes the existence they cannot evade. Number 5, they endeavored to enter you, yet excavated a casket for their personal ambitions. You cannot ascend by severing another individual's ladder. It merely strands you where you commenced. They maintained faith that eliminating you would liberate the airstrip for their personal departure. To them, your presence constituted the impediment, your triumph the silhouette obstructing their radiance. So they schemed. They whispered fabrications in shadowed corners. They forged coalitions constructed upon jealousy. They administered your decline like a commercial strategy, theorizing that should you collapse, they would ultimately ascend. Yet what they failed to recognize was this: demolishing another individual doesn't elevate you. It constructs the barricade obstructing your personal trajectory. Initially, it projected as though they secured victory. A modicum of acknowledgement here, some ovation there. For a moment they entertained the notion that the sabotage functioned. Yet triumph constructed upon sabotage resembles an edifice constructed upon sand. It never endures. Soon the fractures commenced manifesting. Partnerships dissolved, currency seeped through their phalanges, every prospect converted to powder. And the haunting dimension, nothing external precipitated it. This constituted the harvest of their personal intentions. You cannot sow devastation within another individual's garden and anticipate blossoms within yours. Envision this: a brigand who pilfers bricks from your foundation to construct their personal citadel, only to observe their ramparts disintegrate, because every stone transports the weight of culpability. That's precisely what's materializing. They endeavored to elevate themselves upon your anguish, yet all they uncovered was depletion, stagnation, and paranoia. The ovation ceased, the spotlight dimmed, and presently they remain isolated with the verity. They sabotaged you, yet in actuality they sabotaged themselves. And here's the inquiry that gnaws at them. Why does nothing adhere? Why does every scheme disintegrate? The response remains elementary. Because ambition amalgamated with hatred constitutes venom. You cannot eliminate someone blameless and anticipate blessings to follow. They maledicted their personal trajectory the moment they targeted yours. The excavation they created to enter you metamorphosed into the pit where their personal aspirations decompose. So, chosen one, don't misinterpret their descent as happenstance. This constitutes justice manifesting. Their advancement froze because their core remained contaminated, their path paralyzed because their motivations remained corrupt. And presently, they occupy the silence of their personal failure, haunted by the actuality that demolishing you never elevated them, it merely demolished them. Number 6. They characterized you as the antagonist, yet the disguise detached from them instead. The fabrications they disseminated about you metamorphosed into the reflective surfaces that exposed them. They didn't merely gossip, they waged hostilities against your persona. They didn't err once or twice. They constructed entire campaigns centered upon your identity. Whisper networks, group communications, nocturnal telephonic communications dripping with venom. They converted individuals against you as though it constituted their vocational obligation, sculpting narratives that rendered you the villain within chronicles where you weren't even present to mount defense. And for an interval it functioned. Individuals withdrew. Companions expanded distance. The atmosphere shifted when you traversed chambers. You perceived it. The peripheral evaluations, the murmurings, the silence where mirth previously resided. Character assassination campaigns invariably commence loudly, yet authenticity invariably concludes more loudly. Here's the twist they never prepared for. Fabrications possess abbreviated limbs. They don't traverse extensively before stumbling over themselves. Across temporal duration, the identical individuals who accepted their narratives commenced identifying patterns. The affliction you allegedly embodied. Somehow the accuser manifested that identical affliction with every other individual as well. The toxic designation they hurled at you, it circulated retroactively and adhered to them. Gradually, their credibility fractured. No documentation was required, no defense was necessitated. The cosmos simply peeled back strata and the disguise slipped. Envision this. An individual invests years hurling soil at your barrier, only to recognize they're the one standing drenched in filth. That's what's materializing presently. The individuals who previously regarded you with doubt now regard you differently. Their expressions have softened. Some experience mortification. Some experience culpability. Because fundamentally, they recognize they participated. They never solicited your perspective. They never extended you an opportunity. They merely accepted the erroneous voice. Temporal duration doesn't merely unveil authenticity, it mortifies fabrications. And presently, those identical individuals navigate the burden of remorse. They experience shame regarding how readily they were manipulated. They're replaying the junctures they laughed at you, doubted you, or disseminated what they absorbed, wishing they could retract it. Yet you don't even require their apology. Your tranquility articulates on your behalf. Your advancement has become your rebuttal. So Chosen One, comprehend this. You never embodied the antagonist, you embodied the objective. And presently, the very assembly that once doubted you recognizes they wagered against the incorrect spirit. Their silence presently doesn't constitute ignorance, it constitutes culpability. They perceive the authenticity, and it's strangulating them. Number 7. They laughed at your foundation's collapse. Presently, their personal foundation fractures beneath them. The identical mouths that derided your hardship now suffocate upon their personal unraveling. They didn't merely witness your suffering, they celebrated it. When you occupied your nadir, when heartbreak, affliction, or even homelessness attempted to suffocate you, they never extended compassion. They transformed your anguish into punchlines. They circulated your struggles resembling cheap gossip, performing pity publicly while cackling behind secured portals. Some even branded it cosmic justice, smugly declaring you received your due. Yet, let's maintain honesty. They weren't celebrating equity. They were celebrating what they imagined constituted your terminus. Malice doesn't laugh because you're fragile. It laughs because it confuses your reset for annihilation. What they never acknowledged was the intensity of their envy even at your nadir. Envision that. You fractured, yet continued radiating. Even within survival parameters, you transported a presence, a resilience, a luminosity they couldn't smother. That irritated their demons. Your fortitude within fragility constituted a reflective surface exposing their emptiness within abundance. They perceived themselves taller when you appeared diminished, safer when you appeared shattered. They cherished the illusion of authority your anguish bestowed them. Yet here's the twist. They confused preparation with punishment. While they laughed at your tempest, the cosmos was silently rewriting your chronicle. Your anguish was sculpting you, not annihilating you. And presently the shift has materialized. Gradually their equilibrium evaporates. The currency they paraded slips beyond recovery. The connections they exhibited fracture beneath pressure. Their energy feels maledicted. Their tranquility exists as fantasy. And the dread within their ocular regions, it mirrors the identical dread they once attempted to implant within yours. They derided your trial, forgetting trials invariably conclude with testimony. And you, chosen one, you recognize this pattern, you've witnessed this motion picture previously. This doesn't constitute misfortune for them. This constitutes equilibrium. The identical individuals who laughed while you underwent examination now stand exposed within their personal unraveling. They're supplicating for restoration within the silence they once derided, weeping for equilibrium within the chaos they once championed. The cosmos embodies no cruelty. It embodies fairness. You never required vengeance. You never required maledictions. Their arrogance authored the conclusion for them. And presently everything they constructed upon your descent disintegrates into powder. Their laughter has descended into silence, supplanted by dread, and every masonry block of their fraudulent equilibrium reconverts to ash. Number 8, they attempted to perform creator. Presently they're drowning within silence. When you attempt to script another individual's destiny, you erase the script of your personal narrative. They didn't merely cross you, they endeavored to govern you. They coveted holding the stylus to your chronicle, to dictate how extensively you could traverse, who would stand alongside you, and which portals would swing open within your existence. They theorized that should they manipulate sufficiently, whisper sufficiently, and obstruct sufficiently, they could perform divinity within your universe. They tampered with elements that never belonged to them to contact, operating as though appointed gatekeepers of your trajectory. Yet here's the complication with feigning divinity. You invariably become exposed as mortal. Manipulators maintain faith in their dominion until existence reminds them they never occupied the throne. They never entrusted the natural arrangement. They never honored alignment. They coveted your journey according to their conditions. They disseminated fabrications to rewrite your representation. They interfered with timing that never belonged to them to administer. They maneuvered with arrogance, maintaining faith that their influence could override the cosmos's design. And for an interval, it projected as though their stratagems functioned. Yet destiny embodies no fragility. It doesn't bend perpetually. Presently the silence has caught pace with them. Heavy, haunting silence. They supplicate, yet nothing stirs. They petition, yet portals remain secured. They hustle, yet everything slips through their grip. It doesn't constitute misfortune. It constitutes consequence. When you attempt to hijack another individual's trajectory, you forfeit your personal. Envision an individual obstructing sunlight from another individual's garden, only to discover their personal harvests withering within the shadow. That's their actuality presently. Spiritual exile. Disconnected, desiccated. Every movement registers as compelled. Every scheme registers as immobilized. The identical pride that induced them to believe they could perform divinity constitutes the identical pride abandoning them, stranded, powerless, voiceless. And the silence doesn't constitute examination. It constitutes response. It constitutes existence declaring, "You attempted to govern what never belonged to you, so presently nothing responds to you." And chosen one, let this permeate. While they stumble within silence, you maintain your ascent. They attempted to occupy a throne that never belonged to them, and throughout the procedure, they forfeited their position within their personal chronicle. That constitutes a forfeiture no manipulation can ever reclaim. Number 9, they nourished darkness against you. Presently it's consuming them from within. The demons they unleashed never located you. They located their master. They didn't merely envy you. They didn't merely gossip. They crossed the threshold into obsession of such depth it decomposed their spirit. When fabrications failed, and sabotage failed to shatter you, they reached toward something more obscure. They ignited tapers in concealment. They whispered your identity into ceremonies. Some compensated for enchantments, readings, maledictions. Whatever they theorized could obstruct your bounties or bend your trajectory. Others executed it themselves, scribbling petitions against your existence, summoning forces they didn't even comprehend. Within their arrogance, they theorized engaging with shadows would erase your luminosity. Obscure energy resembles combustion. Whoever engages with it will ultimately incur burns. And for a moment it projected as though they secured victory. Perhaps you sensed depletion. Perhaps your slumber grew restless, your spirit heavy, your trajectory saturated with peculiar setbacks. You couldn't explicate the sudden weight, the unaccountable losses, the chaos that defied logic. Yet what they failed to recognize was that your sanctuary extends deeper than their capacity. Their obscurity could graze you, yet it could never consume you. So the energy circulated. It searched for vulnerability. Discovering none, it reversed trajectory bearing interest. Presently they're unraveling. Their nights stand haunted by shadows. Their domiciles no longer register as sanctuary. Their minds grow restless, paranoid, plagued with breakdowns they cannot explicate. They're flinching at whisperings within vacant chambers, transporting dread within their thoracic cavity that won't permit respiration. The identical forces they summoned for authority now constitute their cellmates, declining departure. This doesn't constitute imagination. It constitutes infestation. When you swing portals through animosity, you don't govern who traverses them. That's the verity they never comprehended. Spiritual regulation doesn't bend for envy. You cannot dispatch devastation without eventually occupying the identical table you prepared. And presently, the feast belongs to them to consume. Dread, affliction, chaos, mental torment. No sage can purify it. No crystal can contain it. They've bound themselves to the identical energy they theorized would annihilate you. And chosen one, this doesn't constitute your orchestration. This constitutes their selection reverberating retroactively. They disregarded every caution, every murmur of conscience, every indicator instructing them to halt. They pursued a fraudulent conquest, and presently they're captives of the identical obscurity they recruited. Their descent doesn't constitute randomness, it constitutes repayment. Number 10. They derided your muteness. Presently your radiance has blinded them. Silence doesn't constitute frailty. It constitutes the acoustic signature of someone reloading. They theorized your humility indicated you possessed no combat capability. They misinterpreted your modesty as dread. The fashion you selected, tranquility over theatricality. The fashion you walked away instead of retaliating. The fashion you maintained composure while your identity endured dragging. They assumed it indicated you stood powerless. To them, your silence constituted capitulation. Your patience constituted verification you stood concluded. Yet silence doesn't constitute capitulation. It constitutes strategy. Never misinterpret placid waters for shallow ones. The profundity will submerge you. While they laughed at your muteness, you stood constructing. While they derided your absence, you stood healing. Day by day you sutured wounds they theorized would leave you eternally scarred. You processed anguish they assumed would transform you bitter. You selected advancement where they anticipated ruin. And presently, you're radiating. Not the classification of radiance they can mimic with filters or counterfeit expressions, but a radiance originating from resilience, from survival, from tranquility they cannot purchase or fabricate, and it terrifies them. They observe you within digital spaces, and your joy stings their spirit. They hear your identity, and it tastes resembling culpability within their oral cavity. When they pass you, they sense judgment emanating from your presence, not because you adjudicate them, but because you exist as living verification that their animosity failed. The illumination they attempted to extinguish metamorphosed into the combustion that incinerates their illusions. You embody their punishment. Every expression you project, every victory you claim, every fraction of tranquility you emanate, it all reminds them that they experienced defeat. You stand inviolable presently, and that disturbs them more intensely than had you retaliated, because you never required smearing them. You never required retaliating. You never required contaminating your grip, and yet you're securing victory. Their paramount dread doesn't consist of your survival. It consists of your ascension, loftier than ever without them. Every occasion they witness your radiance, it exposes their failure. Every occasion they observe you thriving, it validates their animosity carried no potency. And that's the most merciless twist of all. The fragile one they laughed at metamorphosed into the unstoppable force they never foresaw. Number 11. They expropriated from your spirit. Presently, their sanity deteriorates. When you plunder a pristine core, the price doesn't get compensated in currency. It gets compensated in tranquility. They didn't merely harm you. They trespassed somewhere sacred. They appropriated your trust and contorted it. They nourished themselves upon your benevolence while deriding it privately. They utilized your loyalty resembling a blade and incised you with it. What they expropriated wasn't material. It constituted a fragment of your spirit, your blamelessness, your vulnerability, that unguarded portion of you that maintained faith in them. And when they concluded, they abandoned you to submerge within silence, bewilderment, and heartbreak, performing as though they had departed pristine. Yet nothing regarding their escape registered as pristine. The cosmos doesn't permit theft of the spirit unscathed. What they theorized constituted triumph, metamorphosed into the seed of their unraveling. Initially, it manifested subtly. Their joy failed to register as brilliant. Their timing registered as misaligned. Existence forfeited its natural cadence. Yet soon the fractures expanded. Their slumber grew restless. Their thoughts accumulated mass. Their spirit converted to cloudiness. They couldn't explicate it. Yet everything commenced registering as more arduous than it formerly did. You cannot extract pages from another individual's chronicle without forfeiting chapters within your personal. Presently their existence registers as a haunted labyrinth, encircled by individuals yet lonelier than ever, pursuing gratifications that no longer satisfy, fleeing distractions, yet discovering solely emptiness. Even conquests register as hollow, because fundamentally they recognize something valuable stands missing. They theorized they could expropriate from you and proceed, yet they failed to recognize the spirit maintains records. Envision an individual stealing the sun from another individual's firmament, only to awaken and recognize their personal world has dimmed. That's their actuality presently. They forfeited beyond your presence. They forfeited the iteration of themselves that exclusively existed when you inhabited their existence. The cost of betraying a pristine spirit constitutes sanity itself. Chosen one, retain this. You may have sustained wounds, yet you weren't annihilated. They expropriated from you, yes, yet the cosmos guaranteed they compensated the toll. And while you reconstruct, they wander across the debris of their personal cognition, burdened by the awareness that what they forfeited can never return. That's the genuine punishment. Number 12. They endeavored to enter verity, yet temporal duration metamorphosed into a megaphone. Fabrications may sprint for a season, yet verity perpetually claims the finish line. They theorized temporal duration would obscure their traces, that should they remain silent sufficiently, smile expansively sufficiently, and maintain proximity to the appropriate individuals, their betrayal would dissipate into chronicle. They banked upon your silence, functioning as the cement that sealed their fabrications. To them, temporal duration constituted their confederate, a shield that would enter what they executed to you beneath strata of distraction and distance. Yet here's the twist they never foresaw. Temporal duration embodies no neutrality. Temporal duration doesn't safeguard fabrications. Temporal duration exposes them. Gradually, fractures commenced forming. Not because you articulated, but because deception invariably leaks. Their disguise accumulated mass. Their rehearsed chronicles commenced faltering. Individuals commenced detecting the contradictions, the tension within their vocal modulation, the fashion their presence registered as misaligned. Verity doesn't require your defense. It merely requires patience. Initially, it manifested subtly. A glance here, a shift in energy there. Companions who once championed them commenced retreating. Murmurs supplanted ovation. Their identity, once welcomed, presently leaves a bitter aftertaste. What they theorized would dissipate with temporal duration instead. Amplified, sharpened, undeniable. Temporal duration had metamorphosed into verity's microphone, amplifying every fracture within their facade. Envision an individual interring dynamite within the earth, maintaining faith it would remain concealed, only for temporal duration itself to ignite the fuse. That's what's materializing. Every passing diurnal cycle renders verity more arduous to disregard, more arduous to deny, more arduous to evade. Their standing unravels thread by thread. Their charisma registers as compelled, their influence hollow. Even strangers detect the misalignment within their spirit. You can fabricate expressions, yet you cannot fabricate energy. And energy never fabricates. Presently, they're suffocating beneath their personal exhibition. Not because you exposed them, but because verity declines remaining interred. Temporal duration has turned against them. What once registered as sanctuary presently constitutes the very implement dismantling their representation. And here's the most merciless irony. They theorized silence would safeguard them, yet silence metamorphosed into their executor. Chosen one, permit this to function as your reminder. You never required vengeance. Temporal duration itself operated within your favor. Fabrications decompose within obscurity, yet verity respires perpetually. And presently the chronometer that once consoled them constitutes the identical chronometer conducting the countdown of their exposure. Number 13. They endeavored to eliminate you, yet existence marked you for sovereignty. They interred your identity within murmurings, yet the diadem already awaited upon your cranium. They didn't merely disfavor you, they waged hostilities against your existence. Every rumor, every counterfeit exhibition of sympathy, every crocodilian tear constituted element of a coordinated campaign to render you extinct. Group communications saturated with fabrications, lateral dialogues dripping with venom, expressions publicly, blades privately. Their objective transcended disagreement. It constituted elimination. They craved you forgotten, irrelevant, erased from your personal chronicle. Yet here's the verity they couldn't endure. You never stood selected by them. Therefore you could never stand dismissed by them. Your worth never stood available for their ballot. Your presence never depended upon their ovation. Your luminosity never operated upon their acceptance. That's why their tactics failed. They theorized they could nullify you, yet all they accomplished was validating your significance. Purpose cannot be interred. It solely amplifies beneath the weight of earth. And presently the inversion stands on full exhibition. Their previously thunderous existences dim. The acclaim they inhabited for has descended into silence, supplanted by murmurings of suspicion. The very chambers they theorized they owned now quietly eject them. Meanwhile you, yes, the one they plotted to eliminate, now step into chambers they swore would never acknowledge your identity, not via force, not via manipulation, via alignment, via equity. Envision this. They slammed portals within your countenance, only to discover those identical portals unlocking for you without exertion whatsoever. That's the potency of existence's equilibrium. They craved you diminutive, yet existence positioned you elevated. They craved you silenced, yet your identity carries further than their fabrications ever could. They craved you extinct, yet presently every attempt to eliminate you has backfired into evidence of your endurance. When existence decides to diadem someone, no character assassination campaign can dethrone them. Chosen one, comprehend this. They didn't fail because they embodied fragility. They failed because you embody ineradicability. They underestimated alignment, underestimated resilience, underestimated how verity perpetually resurrects. And presently you ascend, diademed not via their endorsement, but via the equity of the cosmos itself. Your radiance outshouts their gossip, and your conquest outweighs their schemes. They craved you eliminated. Instead, you stood diademed, and that diadem constitutes the verification that no weapon forged against you ever possessed sufficient potency to secure victory. Number 14. They derided the incorrect spirit. Presently their supplications reverberate within silence. The derision they propelled at you constituted the seed of their personal descent. They theorized you stood as merely another objective, merely another identity to drag through the soil. another fractured spirit to laugh at. Yet they miscalculated. They derided the incorrect one. They failed to recognize your chronicle stood protected, your trajectory aligned, your conflicts documented in fashions they couldn't commence to comprehend. They theorized, they embodied cleverness. The peripheral evaluations, the jests, the casual cruelty circulated resembling entertainment. Yet cruelty doesn't constitute cleverness. It constitutes examination, and they failed. Presently their derision has converted into a prison. Every cruel syllable they once propelled so effortlessly now reverberates backward within their personal actuality. Portals that formerly swung open have slammed secured. Opportunities slip through their grip. Their cognition grows heavy. Their energy registers as maledicted. And when they ultimately bow their cranium in desperation, all they perceive stands as silence. The cost of dishonor doesn't consist of thunder. It consists of absence. That silence outshouts punishment. It doesn't constitute vengeance. It constitutes correction. A divine timeout. They didn't merely mistreat an individual. They mishandled a sacred examination. Where they could have selected humility, they selected arrogance. Where they could have extended mercy, they selected derision. And presently they inhabit within the consequence of their personal arrogance. Envision an individual laughing so thunderously at another's tempest that they fail to detect the flood ascending at their personal feet. That's their actuality. Their conquests register as hollow. Their ovation registers as hollow. Even within chambers saturated with individuals, they sense utterly isolated, because fundamentally they recognize. They retain memory of the precise moment they selected to laugh at you, oblivious to the fact they stood laughing at their personal collapse. The jest invariably converts most mercilessly upon the one who initiated it. And you never stood the fool, you stood the revealer. Their treatment of you exposed the fractures within their character, and presently existence has magnified those fractures into chasms. While they submerge within shadows they summoned, you ascend within a luminosity they cannot contact. Your diadem never stood bestowed by mortal hands. It stood forged within furnace flames, protected by purpose, and positioned where no character assassination campaign could reach. This doesn't constitute a comeback. This constitutes equity in real time. The identical individuals who once derided your descent now stand haunted by your ascent. Permit them to occupy the silence they manufactured. You maintain your radiance, maintain your ascent, maintain your forward locomotion, because their laughter authored their conclusion, and your resilience authored your dominion. And so, chosen ones, this marks where the circle closes. Every scheme, every fabrication, every laugh, they all circulated homeward to the ones who initiated them. What registered as your terminus constituted merely the prologue for their exposure,